Welcome to This Week in Coworking, where industry leaders get succinct, actionable insights. Here are your hosts, Hector Kolonas and LaRosa.
Welcome back to This Week in Coworking. This is our weekly recap for week 31 in 2025. My name is LaRosa, and I'm joined by my recap co-host, Hector Kolonas. And today we've got a special guest from Vast Coworking, Shane Lee. Some of the topics that we're going to be tackling in this week's recap, we've got some big news on a promotion recognizing his decade in the industry at his startup. We've got big news coming out of Africa for a shared workspace that made close to the top for a pretty big list. A lot of data is coming out of the leasing market in the US. We've also got a hot topic talking about engaging enterprise accounts in your co-working space. And last but not least, what would be a weekly recap without some type of discussion about AI agents, AI bots, and the like. So to take it away from here, please welcome Hector Kolonas with our guest Shane Lee from Vast, who also so happens to be a sponsor for this week.
Hey everybody, welcome. Shane, what do you do at Vast?
Thanks for having me, Mike and Hector. It's an honor to be here. So my role, I oversee our franchise development team at Vast Coworking. So many of you may know, some of you may not. Vast Coworking is a collection of 3 different franchise companies: VentureX, Office Evolution, and Intelligent Office. And so we're the largest co-working franchise group in the industry. So I head up our franchise development team, which entails bringing in new franchisees, helping existing franchisees expand into new spaces as well.
And that actually brings us right to what you've asked us to kind of promote out to the world this week through our sponsorship of the newsletter and this podcast, where Vast and our team here at This Week in Coworking are partnering up on something really cool. A couple of weeks ago, we started working with the folks over at DenSwap to make selling a co-working space or buying a co-working space easier, faster, and more transparent. You folks love what that was all about, and you wanted to reach out. But why is Vast so interested in promoting these listings throughout your network?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, what we've found in our, again, 200 plus locations across the globe, we have a lot of franchise owners that obviously want to expand and add new locations. And many of them are starting new locations from scratch, essentially. However, a lot of them prefer an up and running co-working space, right? So maybe an independent co-working space that they can acquire and then convert into one of our 3 brands. So we saw it as a really good opportunity to take any independent co-working operator that is considering retiring or moving into a different industry, whatever the case may be, and presenting those opportunities to our vast network. We saw it as a really good opportunity. We have, again, the 200 plus locations that I mentioned. Since we've started franchising, we've received over 53,000 inquiries into people wanting to open one of our co-working locations. So we saw it as a perfect partnership opportunity where you have people who may be interested in selling their co-working spaces. We have people who are looking to expand. So that was the thought process behind the partnership.
I want to just go a little bit more into kind of why, as a newsletter, we started looking into this direction. And over the last, I want to say 2 to 2.5 years, I keep getting emails every couple of weeks from folks that are like, look, I love this industry, but my wife's moving across the States. We're changing country. I want to refresh. I want to get out of my space, but I've put so much love and passion into building this community. Can you help us find someone who's going to take over this space, support the community, take over our lease, or if we're profitable, buy us out, right? It's part of a business transaction. If you are in that boat and you're kind of thinking about like where to go with this and if this is the right move for you, go back in the podcast feed, listen to the podcast I did with Craig, who is one of the co-founders at DenSwap. He's sold, merged, bought, traded, taken over co-working spaces in all avenues. So definitely go listen to that. My question for you, Shane, is out of all the spaces that the current franchises you have, how many of them have actually expanded through taking over another space?
Yeah, I believe last time we checked, it was around 70%. Whether that's acquiring a new location, whether that's starting an additional location from the ground up, expanding their current space, right? So our system as a whole is frankly doing very well. So we have a lot of owners who maybe they're at 100% occupancy and they want to expand, right? So we do have many what we call multi-unit operators that are open to expanding, and not just in one particular market, right? We have some owners who own co-working spaces in 4 or 5 different states as well. So again, that's why I think the partnership just made a ton of sense from our end.
That's cool. I do want to ask, when it comes to obviously an indie operator selling their business to a franchise, how does that experience normally go, right? Obviously, as someone who's always worked with a whole bunch of amazing indie spaces, like a franchise is pretty rigid, right? You've got your brand guidelines, you've got your tech stack. Like, what does it look like realistically, as someone who's probably seen this before, for the person or the community that's now coming into the Vast network?
Sure. Yeah, it's a great question. So we try to make it as seamless as possible, right? So if there's an up and running co-working space, yes, we want our branding on it. We want our signage, those sorts of things, but we're also not going to make the franchisee tear everything down and start from scratch. We want to utilize it. There's existing furniture in the space. We want to try not to disturb the existing customer base, right? We don't want members to leave just because a new owner comes in. So we see typically a lot of them end up staying once a conversion occurs. We call it a conversion when they convert from an independent co-working space to one of our brands. So again, we try to make it as seamless as possible for the members and for the franchisee, of course.
That's really cool. I just want to obviously hit it out there that this isn't an exclusive partnership. You guys are looking at the same listings that everyone else on the Twix subscriber list or anyone else around the world are seeing as well. Just an additional way for us to help, especially those prospective co-working entrants and the existing members, find and connect with those folks who are choosing to sell their businesses. Mike, any questions for Shane before we dive into what is a jam-packed newsletter this week?
Nope, I think it makes perfect sense. It's exciting to see another avenue that Vast has to help its current and new franchisees expand. So I think we should dive on into all the news. This is pretty jam-packed for a last week of July.
Yes, I was looking at the calendar and I was like, where in the year are we? It's not like we do this every week or anything, but at week 31 of 52, there is a lot to share. Now, we're not going to be able to touch on everything. As Mike said, we've got a pretty big roster to dig into. So if you are, co-working curious, or you're in this industry and there's just too much information, head over to thisweekincoworking.com and click on week 31 so you can follow along as we go through it, or find the stories that we didn't get into, but we still think were newsworthy enough to put in your inbox this morning. So starting off, we have 2 pretty big celebrations. We're going to start over in Sofia, Bulgaria, where OfficeRnD hit their 10-year anniversary. Huge congrats to the team. But as part of that celebration, or in adjacent to that celebration, Miro Miroslavov, who is the original CEO and co-founder, has been promoted to a chairman of the board position. So we wish him a huge congrats, the team a huge congrats for 10 years in this industry. I still remember the first OfficeRnD pilots and demos coming out. So a huge milestone for them. Jumping over from Bulgaria to Africa, we saw a pretty cool stat coming out of the country. Mike, do you want to take it from here?
Yep. So Africa Works, which is a co-working and co-living operator, was actually ranked 5th on the Africa's fastest growing companies list as published by Financial Times for 2025. They were founded in 2019. They've made several different lists in the past, but this was the first time that they've found their place. They've got 15 plus locations. They're looking to expand, I think, with another dozen or so more in the works. And I think a lot of times people not sleep on Africa, but don't put into context the scope, the sheer mass opportunity there is in Africa. Some of the customers that this operator works with currently are Spotify, TikTok, L'Oreal, MasterCard. There's a lot of the Fortune 100, Fortune 50, Fortune 10 that do business in Africa. And as we've seen for over a decade now, flex workspace and co-working helps companies expand into new territories without having to build out full proper offices right away. And I believe, Shane, you mentioned that you all have recently signed a franchisee in Africa as well. So a lot of growth all over.
Yeah, absolutely. We just signed what we call a master license partner for Office Evolution for South Africa, who plans to, I believe, develop several locations in that market there. Just more signs that co-working is thriving in Africa, which is very cool.
It certainly is. And for folks who don't know, I was actually born in South Africa. I grew up in South Africa for most of my childhood. And it is a market that is very ripe for co-working, given the fact that there is a lot of highly skilled workers, but there's also completely different challenges. And this is why I'm very excited that we're soon going to be doing a deep dive series into the African ecosystem, as well as running a mini series out of the continent, just to tell those stories, but also to show how different it is in Africa. So I spoke to a lot of operators over the last couple of weeks, and things that we take for granted here in North America or in Europe, like constant electricity, decent Wi-Fi. These are things that are value-added services in other parts of the world. Do you need armed security? Do you need, private parking with fencing? And do you need bulletproof window? Like, there's just a very different market. And I'm definitely not throwing them completely into a stereotype there, but it's just a different way of running a co-working space. And so I'm really excited to dig a little bit more into that. But huge congrats to the team at Africa Works. They have been on a tear over the last couple of years. I think they had a 40x improvement in their revenue over the last few years. And that is just tremendous to see. I think we're going to start seeing a lot of more operators, as we're seeing from Shane, international brands moving into Africa to kind of build up and be part of that shift in the ecosystem. But it's a very exciting market, and I can't wait to dig into it a little bit more.
Yep. Next up, one of our favorite topics to dissect and dive into is data. Yardi's been a really great provider of insight and data points. Their commercial cafe blog published a June 2025 report that showed kind of some mixed numbers. There's a lot here to dive into. So some of the first was that US office vacancy has reached 19.4% in May. So it's up 160 basis points year over year. The average listing rate also rose 4.8%. So it's very interesting to see that the price per square foot is going up, but the vacancy also continues to drive up. One of the other factors, because there's a bunch of different factors in this data, also includes construction pipeline shrinking. And so we're seeing a lot of this office to ... conversion. So either office to residential, office to warehousing, which is another story that we'll dive into momentarily. We're also seeing some of these office to mixed use. So instead of fully commercial, which is retail on the ground floor, it's a combination of some types of amenity space or healthcare and fitness with some housing, with some additional office in it. Some of the markets that are getting hit the hardest with vacancy rates, Austin most definitely has been in the news lately, not only for their residential numbers. I think it was just one of those Sun Belt cities that already had major growth leading into COVID, and then COVID just poured onto it. I think a lot of Californians that relocated are moving back out. But it's also interesting to see there was one other factoid I want to dive into, and then we can open up for discussion, is that they found that about 14,000 office properties have loans that have either recently matured or will mature by the end of 2027. So 33% of all office loans equal to about $290 billion. We're seeing a lot of folks having difficulty either refinancing those or selling their buildings at a loss. So there's a lot of mixed numbers in office. But if there's one thing for sure, it's that quality is where the clients are going to. The Class A's are full, and some of these older buildings are like out there left holding the bag.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, it's a mixed bag of data. There are some strong numbers in there, some strong areas for opportunity. But from the conversations I've been having with building owners and asset and portfolio managers, there is this tinder of opportunity that could change the market for everyone. With so many loans, what is it, $290 billion in loans coming due or due?
Yep.
There is no time like now to change how co-working spaces are valued. Because you have a building where the only thing generating profit in some of these C and lower buildings is the co-working floors. But when you speak to the bank, they are rated at 0 rate. There is no steady income, and so they cannot be tied to the valuation of the building. Now, as the banks start to claw back more of these locations and are looking to resell them and put them back on the market, they are in a very tricky catch-22. In order for them to get rid of these buildings at a profit, they need to start valuing the co-working floors as net positive towards the total value of the building. And so that is a market where a lot of brokers and everyone is kind of looking at to figure out, what does it look like when some of these banks start trying to sell these buildings that they previously said they couldn't increase the value of because of co-working. So I think that's a really interesting angle at this area. And obviously, if that happens, more and more buildings will want to bring co-working in to increase the value of their buildings, to not only revenue, but also be able to balance their loans. It opens up a lot more doors. At least that's the conversation I'm having kind of behind the story. But I want to kind of see if anyone else is feeling the same slightly opportunistic view of this news story.
Yeah, from our end, we look at it as opportunity, right? Selfishly, with a franchise and looking to expand and open new locations, if there's more openings and more landlords that are looking to get co-working spaces in there, that's great for our franchisees and our system, but co-working as a whole, I think for sure as well.
I do think it's also going to open up another opportunity where capitalized operators will be able to acquire their buildings. We're seeing a lot of operators like storing troves of cash from revenue right now to be able to move into more of a PropCo-OpCo model. We may even see groups. I know that Vast has a group of franchisees who are working together. They all kind of pool resources. Maybe we'll see groups of operators acquiring buildings, especially if these kind of loans are due and they're the only ones generating profits in these buildings, but they can't get valued at the building. We might see more acquisitions. Now, we've seen a few plays like this in the past, none so as prevalent as in the co-warehousing space, where industrial properties are kind of at a rock bottom pricing, and in areas where Amazon can't use them as a fulfillment center. But everywhere else, we're seeing new young operators like Portal come in and win bids to take over these buildings and turn them into co-warehousings, to make co-warehousing buildings, turn them into co-working, change them into different types of workspaces. So it's going to be really interesting to see, as this kind of squeeze happens on the kind of commercial real estate market, whether there's going to be some operators who take advantage of that and kind of acquire their buildings, enter new markets, put on new twists, create entirely new niches for industries that need their own type of co-working. It's going to be really interesting to watch what happens in this space.
Yeah, I have to say, it's kind of funny. A lot of these larger banks that hold all the notes, they control their own destiny right now because they are recalculating how they value some of these buildings with some of these facilities in them. So even with mortgage-backed delinquency rates hitting 11% in June, I see a lot of these larger REITs, they're calling the shots because not only do they hold the note, but then they actually control how they build out the valuations. And so it is exciting to see. I think that this is nothing but opportunity for flex operators, and we'll just continue to, I think, see that squeeze on those that expanded versus by leasing, those that expanded via the PropCo, OpCo, or the management models. Always grateful for all that data that comes in from commercial cafe and some of the Yardi properties. It really helps us get a much better insight into what's going on, even if the powers that be still are calling the shots.
I try to take a little bit of a pessimistic view. If the bank, there's a lot of times where we've seen co-working spaces have to leave their building because the landlord changes or the owner of the building changes, or you suddenly get skyrocketing rates. This is your time, whatever happens, to work on your numbers. Make sure that you know your unit economics. Make sure you know the value you're driving into the building, into your space, into the local community. And those are all your bargaining chips. Build up that deck of cards, and be ready to kind of go to someone who probably has never worked with a co-working space before, who's taking over the building, whether it's a bank or a PE firm or whatever it is, and be able to play and shoot your shot, because you might actually get a pretty good deal out of this if you know how to play your cards right. So definitely look at your numbers, get your ducks in order, as they say, and be ready for what comes next. Talking about what comes next, we saw two very different pieces in the news and views section of the newsletter this week. We had Kaylee talking about how to really build a framework for enterprise attracting and working with enterprise clients. And then we saw the team over at Clockwise looking into how they're not actually competing with other co-working spaces, but they're competing with, someone working from their bedroom or their kitchen table or a second bedroom or a home office. What do you gents think about both of these sides? It's two completely sides of the same
Yeah.
coin, but the whole point is how do we get more people co-working?
It's a conversation that I don't really miss having, no longer being in that aggregator on demand world. But I will say a third piece I just saw yesterday that did not make its way into the newsletter was also a post from Michael Cockburn at Dasana talking about the same thing, about the challenges of having these 12,000 person large enterprise teams that just don't necessarily go. And of course, I always think of Dasana whenever I hear about Clockwise because they both hail from Scotland and they've done a lot of work together. I really respect what Keely's done. Keely was employee number one at Expansive. So she's been with that company, I think 13, 14 years. It's a long time. She was employee number one. And so for the last 5, 6, 7 years, she built out this enterprise sales effort. Enterprise sales is kind of like that holy grail. Everyone wants to base their valuation on the prospect of getting an enterprise account because you think that they have a high budget, they've got a lot of people. The challenge is that it might take far longer to close that account. And then what happens is that you close that account, you onboard 2,000 plus users, and then 20 of them use the product. And so you're either worried if you're an operator that they won't renew it because they're not using it enough, or if you're in the aggregator world, the whole way that you make money is off of usage. And so these pieces really rang true. I think Kaylee makes some really good points about what to expect in trying to stand up an enterprise offering. And Scarlett's piece really reminded me, I always quote Benjamin Diet, formerly Grind, that when they expanded from New York to Chicago, he always used to joke that his biggest competition in Chicago is the affordable 2-bedroom apartment. And so I think really leaning into the types of secondary offerings that you all as an operator provide really differentiates. And you have to give these people a reason to get out of their house. Because even as much as I love co-working, even if there's one that's close to me, like I'm at home, I have my big monitor, I've got like my coffee machine downstairs, I'm in my habit, but I know deep down I need to get out of the house. So I always used to say to operators, like, it's not about building it, they will come. You then have to give them a reason to check it out. But yeah, that's my long winded hot take on that. I'll put my soapbox away.
And I think you said it perfectly. I would echo that. And I think it's about building a community, right? You give the members a reason to come in every day or however many days a week they decide to come in. But it is a struggle that some of our operators are battling. But I think part of our business model is we want to give that good experience to the member, right? We want to make them that 5-star service is what we say. Agreed 100% with everything Mike said.
Yep. I mean, it's also really interesting going back to kind of the previous story and the data set that we're sharing is another reason why landlords are bringing in co-working is to give that additional amenity, that additional service to the enterprise, so like the larger tenants, so they can spill out into the co-working space, but also as a kind of an insurance policy, right? If you have got that established 2,000 person team and you can give them half the space, but give them spillover space for the rest, you could probably retain that customer. So it's just a really interesting kind of correlation. And I just love Kaylee's work in the enterprise, kind of building that entire framework up from the ground up and really working on, it's a very different product. Yes, there's community, there's a reason to come in, there's the extra added benefits, there's a community, there's the kind of amenitized service, but the enterprise worker doesn't come in for a lunch and learn about tax, right? Or a how to grow your business, a seminar, or a networking event. I have seen many folks in corporate where the last thing on their mind is going to a happy hour with the people at their office, right? They want to kind of get out of there as quickly as they can. So it's a completely different type of community. And the team at Expansive are kind of leading the way, not only in doing it, but in sharing how they're doing it so we can grow the pie. for all co-working spaces. So I definitely tip my hat to Katie and the team at Expansive. So we're going to finish off with a very quick dive into AI agents, because if you know me, you know I can't shut up about this stuff. We saw a pre-fund video from Igor over at SpaceSpring using ChatGPT's AI agent mode. For folks who don't know what that is, which probably I'm the last person to find out about it because my parents use ChatGPT more than I do. It essentially allows a virtual machine or a virtual version of a computer to do things that you would normally do. So what Igor asked his agent to do was to log into SpaceSpring, which is a co-working management system, and book a meeting room at a specific time for a specific customer. It managed to get through, getting all the way through the process. The last thing it does, as most agents do now, is they confirm any intent to buy or intent to purchase, just a legal requirement and the way the world works right now. But it did everything until confirming the booking, and then you had to just click confirm. We've seen similar videos being shared before, right? We saw people asking some of the other agents, find me a meeting room in Manhattan, find me a office in Tampa, Florida, find me, and it kind of goes out, does the search. It's interesting to see how they understand how we explain co-working things on all of our websites. But what I liked about this take was a lot of folks are looking at the agents from the end user perspective. But there's a lot of tedious work happening within co-working spaces. As you've heard, if you've ever heard me speak before about the toggle tax, jumping between things all the time, trying to figure out which little piece of information goes in which place, that can slowly stop being delegated to an AI agent, to something that has your passwords. You don't have to create a new kind of infrastructure and have it go do the tasks. Some great examples: onboarding a member into the 13 different systems that a member needs to be added to, checking status if someone's paid something. These are all things that can be automated through AI agents. Obviously, proceed with caution. There was a news story, I think a couple of weeks ago, where a site building AI agent actually wiped an entire database of a company and they lost their entire production environment. So proceed with caution, but it's a really interesting way to just reframe the AI agent to think about, as a business, how can you deploy AI agents to make your own team more efficient in the tooling that we have in our industry and the hundreds of dashboards we all have to look at every month. It's just an interesting way to kind of look at this emerging technology. And on that note, I am not an AI agent, neither are my two fantastic co-hosts. Gentlemen, thank you very much for leading this conversation with me today. We'll be back in your podcast feed very shortly. If you have any thoughts or comments or feedback, there's comments under this wherever you listen to us or wherever you're watching with us. If you enjoyed it, share it with a co-working colleague. If you didn't enjoy it, tell no one. No, I'm joking. Please let us know how we can improve it. And we'll be back again soon. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me again this week.
Bye, guys.